Hello, friends. Close your eyes, take a slow breath, and imagine yourself drifting backward through time. The air is heavy with the scent of incense, silk rustles in the evening breeze, and the world seems quieter, slower, more mysterious. You are about to step into a story not often told in classrooms, a story of how one of the mightiest empires on earth was brought low, not by armies of steel and fire alone, but by something far smaller, far subtler, and far more devastating. A flower, dried and smoked, its sap turned to powder. Tonight, let us whisper the story of how opium destroyed China's greatest empire. We begin in the early 1700s, when China was ruled by the Qing dynasty. Picture great palaces shimmering under the morning sun, their golden roofs shining like waves of fire. The Forbidden City stood at the heart of Beijing, guarded by walls that had seen centuries of emperors pass. Outside, merchants bustled through busy marketplaces, and the empire stretched so wide that it felt endless. To the world, China was a giant, self-sufficient, wealthy, and powerful. Western nations admired it, envied it, and dreamed of trading with it. Tea, porcelain, and silk flowed out of Chinese ports like treasures from a hidden world. British nobles sipped fragrant Chinese tea, carefully shipped across oceans. Porcelain cups painted with blue dragons sat on their dining tables. Silk gowns shimmered in candlelight during grand European dances. And yet, for all this trade, China wanted very little in return. Foreign merchants brought wool, clocks, even silver coins, but the Chinese people were unimpressed. China saw itself as the center of civilization, needing nothing from the outside world. This imbalance created a problem. Britain in particular loved Chinese tea so much that it spent mountains of silver importing it. But China had no desire for British goods. Silver drained from Britain's treasury into China's coffers, and the British East India Company, responsible for much of the trade, was desperate to find a solution. They wanted something the Chinese would buy, something addictive enough to create endless demand. That something turned out to be opium. Now, opium was not new to China. For centuries, it had been used in small doses as medicine, mixed with herbs, prescribed by healers, used to ease pain. But in the 1700s, British merchants began bringing large quantities of opium from India, where the poppy fields stretched endlessly under the sun. Unlike medicine, this opium was refined and concentrated, easy to smoke in pipes. And when people smoked it, they felt warm, calm, detached from worry. A single puff could melt away stress. But with that comfort came hunger, the kind of hunger that never truly faded, no matter how much was consumed. At first, the trade was small, quiet, almost unnoticed. A few wealthy merchants indulged. A few households experimented. But word spread. Smoking opium became a pastime, a luxury, and eventually a craving. By the late 1700s, the habit was spreading across classes. Officials, soldiers, farmers, no one was untouched. Opium dens, dark, smoky rooms where men lay in half-dreams, multiplied in towns and cities. The empire that once prided itself on discipline and order was slipping into a haze. Imagine it. Once vigilant guards at the city gates, their eyes drooping, their hands too slow to lift spears. Farmers who once toiled from dawn to dusk now sold their tools to buy just one more pipe. Young men, strong and full of promise, wasting away into thin shadows of themselves. The very veins of the empire were filling with smoke. The Qing court, began to notice. Silver, once flowing into China, was now flowing out. Why? Because the people addicted to opium paid for it in silver. The empire's treasure drained away, and its strength with it. And so, some officials raised their voices in alarm. Among them was one man whose name would echo through history. Lin Zexu. He was a scholar and governor, known for his honesty, discipline, and deep love for his country. In the early 1830s, he was appointed by the emperor to stamp out the opium trade once and for all. Lin Zexu saw with clear eyes what many tried to ignore. He wrote to Queen Victoria of Britain, pleading for the trade to stop. "What would you do," he asked, "if foreigners poured poison into your land?" But the letter never reached her, or if it did, it was ignored. The British merchants and their government had grown too dependent on the profits of opium. So Lin Zexu took drastic measures. In 1839, in the city of Canton, he seized and destroyed over 20,000 chests of opium, nearly 3 million pounds of the drug. The crates were broken open, the powder poured into pits, and mixed with salt water until it was useless. For China, it was a moral victory, a bold stand. For Britain, it was a declaration of war. That war, the First Opium War, would change everything. But before we drift into the smoke of battle, pause with me here for a moment. Take another breath. Let your mind picture those crates stacked like mountains on the docks, the powder spilling like sand into the sea. Imagine the British merchants, furious, calculating their losses. Imagine Lin Zexu, standing tall, believing he had saved his people. The tide of history was shifting, and neither side truly understood how deep the waters would run. And here, softly, I will remind you, if you're enjoying this journey into forgotten corners of the past, make sure to subscribe so you never miss the next whispered tale. Now, let us continue. The British government was outraged at Lin Zexu's actions. For them, opium was not just a trade, it was a lifeline. The East India Company relied on the profits, and British officials believed their right to trade was absolute. And so, in the summer of 1839, Britain sent warships, sleek, powerful vessels, armed with cannons that could shatter wooden walls. The Qing Empire had never seen ships like these. China's navy was small, outdated, built for river patrols and coastal defense. Their cannons were old, their tactics rooted in centuries past. When British ships appeared off the coast, their iron hulls gleaming, their guns thundering, the difference was clear. The First Opium War was less a contest of equals and more a collision of centuries. China's ancient world against Britain's industrial power. Yet, in those early days, the Qing soldiers fought bravely. They manned their forts, launched fire ships, and resisted with what they had. But battle after battle revealed the truth. China was not prepared. The British advanced along the coast, capturing cities, blockading ports, and cutting deep into the empire's pride. And so, as cannons roared and smoke filled the skies, the Qing court began to crumble from within. Officials bickered, generals blamed one another, and the emperor grew restless, fearful of losing his mandate of heaven. The people suffered, caught between the hunger for opium and the destruction of war. The story of the empire's fall had only just begun. The First Opium War raged like a storm, though uneven and cruel. Imagine the thunder of cannons echoing across the Pearl River Delta, plumes of smoke rising into the sky, and villagers watching helplessly from the shore as foreign ships carved their way inland. The British Royal Navy, armed with ironclads and modern artillery, moved with speed and precision. The Qing defenders, brave but poorly equipped, fought with outdated weapons, their cannons often exploding in their own hands, their ships splintering under the force of British firepower. This war was not only about trade, it was about pride, sovereignty, and the right to say no. The Qing dynasty had long believed itself the Middle Kingdom, the center of the world, superior to all others. But the war revealed an unsettling truth. The world had changed, and China was no longer ahead. Picture the streets of Canton, once bustling with trade, now silenced by fear. Merchants shuttered their shops. Families huddled in their homes, uncertain if tomorrow would bring soldiers or starvation. British troops marched through Chinese towns, their red uniforms glowing like fire against the pale walls. Resistance flared, but the outcome was clear. By 1842, the Qing court, exhausted and humiliated, sought peace. The war ended with the Treaty of Nanking, a treaty that China had no power to negotiate. Its terms were harsh, almost unthinkable for a nation that once called itself the Celestial Empire. Under the treaty, China was forced to hand over Hong Kong Island to Britain. 5 ports, Canton, Amoy, Foochow, Ningbo, and Shanghai, were opened to foreign merchants, free from Chinese control. Britain demanded a massive indemnity in silver, draining what little wealth remained. And most painful of all, opium was not banned. The poison that had sparked the war would continue to flow, stronger than ever. Take a breath here. Imagine the emperor, sitting beneath the golden dragon throne, reading the terms of the treaty. His court silent, his pride shattered. The Son of Heaven, once believed to rule by divine mandate, forced to bow before foreign powers. The humiliation sank deep into the empire's soul, a wound that would never fully heal. But the story does not end here. No, this was only the beginning. With foreign ports now open, merchants from Britain, France, and later the United States poured into China. Trade boomed, but it was not a fair exchange. Opium imports skyrocketed. Addiction spread like fire in dry grass. By the 1850s, millions of Chinese were smoking daily, their lives wrapped in a haze. Productivity fell, families broke apart, and crime rose. The empire weakened from within, but the outside world was not finished pressing in. Other nations saw Britain's success and wanted their share. France, emboldened by its own colonial ambitions, joined Britain in demanding greater access to Chinese markets. Together, they launched yet another conflict, the Second Opium War, which erupted in 1856. Close your eyes and picture Beijing. 1860. The British and French armies marched toward the Forbidden City. Their cannons rumble across the plains, their rifles gleam in the sun. The Qing soldiers, brave but outmatched, try to resist, but they are swept aside like leaves in a storm. The foreign forces push into the heart of the empire itself. And then, one of the darkest moments in Chinese history, the invaders reach the Summer Palace, a sprawling masterpiece of gardens, lakes, and halls filled with treasures collected over centuries. Imagine jade carvings, golden statues, scrolls painted by the hands of emperors, silk tapestries shimmering in the moonlight, a treasure house of civilization. The British and French troops loot it all. Priceless artifacts are carted away, some still sitting in museums and private collections to this very day. When the palace is emptied, the soldiers set it on fire. Flames devour the wooden beams, smoke curls into the sky, and centuries of beauty vanish in a single night. The empire's heart, once proud and unshaken, is reduced to ash. Pause here with me. Let your breath slow. Imagine walking through those gardens, hearing the crackle of fire, seeing the statues melt and the silk blacken. Imagine the silence afterward, the wind carrying only the scent of smoke. That silence was the silence of defeat. The Qing emperor, humiliated once more, fled the forbidden city. Another treaty was forced upon China, the Treaty of Tientsin, demanding even more ports, more rights for foreigners, and the legalization of opium. Yes, the very drug that had sparked decades of suffering was now made legal, flooding every village and city, binding millions of people to chains they could not see, but could always feel. For ordinary Chinese families, life grew harder. Picture a farmer in a small village, once proud of his crops. Now, instead of tending rice or wheat, he sells his harvest just to buy a small lump of opium. His children go hungry, his wife pleads. But the craving controls him. Multiply that story by millions, and you see an empire crumbling not just from invasion, but from within. But history, as it always does, found a way to resist. Whispers of rebellion spread through the countryside. Secret societies and desperate peasants began to rise against the Qing government, accusing it of weakness, corruption, and failure. Among these uprisings, one would grow so vast, so terrifying, that it would shake the empire to its core. The Taiping Rebellion. Led by a man who believed himself the brother of Jesus Christ, the Taiping rebels built their own kingdom in southern China, rejecting both the Qing and the foreign powers. They gathered millions of followers, stormed cities, and declared a new heavenly dynasty. And so, in the mid-19th century, China found itself torn in three directions, bleeding from foreign wars, poisoned by opium, and collapsing under the weight of civil war. The empire that had once seemed eternal was now gasping for breath. But the story does not end here, not yet. Because the opium trade, the wars, and the rebellions were only chapters in a longer tragedy, one that would haunt China for generations to come. Now, take another slow breath and let the images fade for a moment. The looted palaces, the burning gardens, the broken farmers' fields. This is where we leave the empire tonight, standing on the edge of disaster, yet still holding on. The whispers of the past are not done with us yet. In the next part of this tale, we will follow China deeper into its century of humiliation, when foreign powers carved it apart like a feast, when opium seeped into every corner of daily life, and when the dynasty fought desperately to hold what little remained. Close your eyes. Let the echoes of history guide you toward rest. And remember, tomorrow, the story continues. The smoke of war had barely cleared, but the wounds it left behind were deep, raw, and unhealed. By the 1860s, China's proud dynasty was staggering, like a giant struck again and again, unable to rise. The Second Opium War had left the empire broken, its treasures stolen, its dignity stripped away. And yet, the opium trade, the very poison that had started this tragedy, was now fully legalized, flooding every corner of the empire. Imagine walking through a Chinese village at dusk. The air smells faintly of smoke, but not from cooking fires. In shadowy rooms, men recline on bamboo mats, their eyes glazed, pipes balanced between their lips. The laughter of children is gone, replaced by silence, broken only by coughs and sighs. This was not a single tragedy. It was a daily one, repeated in every province, every city, every town. The emperor, hemmed in by treaties and drained of silver, could do little. His officials, many of them addicts themselves, moved slowly, their judgment clouded. The once proud civil service, the heart of China's governance, was rotting from within. And outside the palace walls, resentment simmered like boiling water. For while the foreign powers loomed over China like hawks, circling and waiting to swoop, another storm was rising from the ground. Rebellion. The Taiping Rebellion, one of the largest uprisings in human history, erupted in the 1850s and stretched into the 1860s. It was not merely a revolt, it was a new vision of the world, one born from anger, faith, and desperation. Led by Hong Xiuquan, a man who believed himself the younger brother of Jesus Christ, the Taiping sought to overthrow the Qing and build a new heavenly kingdom. Picture it. Armies of peasants in simple clothes, waving banners painted with fiery slogans, marching against imperial forces. Villages fell, cities were taken, and at one point, the Taiping controlled vast stretches of southern China. Their capital at Nanjing stood as a rival throne, glittering with the promise of a new future. For the Qing, already weakened by opium and war, the rebellion was like a knife twisting in an open wound. And the cost? Catastrophic. Estimates suggest that 20 million people perished, killed in battles, starved by famine, or caught in the crossfire of chaos. The empire was bleeding out, its people trapped between foreign powers, opium smoke, and civil war. But as one rebellion burned itself out, others followed. Secret societies like the Boxers, decades later, would rise to drive out the foreigners. Provincial armies, led by ambitious generals, grew stronger than the emperor's own. Each uprising, each warlord, each whisper of rebellion chipped away at the Qing's authority. Meanwhile, foreign powers tightened their grip. Britain, France, Russia, and later Japan carved out spheres of influence, controlling trade, building railroads, and demanding privileges. The phrase that would haunt China for generations, the century of humiliation, was being written in real time, and through it all, opium remained. By the late 19th century, tens of millions were addicted. Some smoked quietly at home, others in crowded dens where the air was so thick with fumes you could taste it. Children watched their parents fade, communities dissolved, and yet the trade continued, unstoppable. Now, pause for a moment. Imagine the heart of Beijing, the forbidden city itself. Its walls still rose, its halls still echoed with ritual and ceremony. But behind the red gates, emperors no longer commanded the world. Instead, they signed papers dictated by foreign envoys, their golden dragons dulled, their authority hollow. The Son of Heaven remained in name, but not in power. And as the empire weakened, a new generation began to whisper of change. Reformers looked to the West, dreaming of new schools, new armies, new industries. Could China modernize? Could it rise again? Some believed yes. Others resisted, clinging to the old ways. The debates raged, but time was slipping away. By the dawn of the 20th century, the cracks had become canyons. The Qing dynasty, battered by war, rebellion, and addiction, collapsed in 1911. The dragon throne was empty. The last emperor, only a child, carried from the palace. The empire that had once seemed eternal was gone, and yet its fall could be traced back like smoke carried by the wind, to those first crates of opium unloaded on Chinese shores, to a flower grown in distant fields, turned into a weapon more devastating than any cannon. Now, as you lay here listening, ask yourself, how could something so small, so fragile, a dried poppy, topple an empire of hundreds of millions? The answer lies in the way weakness spreads. Not in sudden battles, but in slow decay. Not in fire alone, but in smoke. But even in darkness, stories carry light. For though the Qing fell, China endured. The people, scarred but unbroken, would rise again. In the 20th century, they would fight wars, endure revolutions, and rebuild. The opium smoke that once clouded every home would, eventually, clear. Tonight, we leave the story at this turning point. The empire is gone, but the people remain. The past whispers to us, reminding us that strength is fragile, that pride can fall, and that even the greatest powers can be undone not by armies, but by choices, trade, and addiction. Close your eyes now. Picture the dragon fading into mist, the opium dens dissolving into silence, the palaces reduced to memory. Let the weight of history settle softly, like dust on an ancient scroll. And as you drift toward sleep, carry with you the lesson of this tale, that every empire, no matter how great, is only as strong as the choices it makes. Good night.